The beginning, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to what I would call an additional session, an introductory session to the conference that is going to be held tomorrow, Christians of Europe in the Face of Crises. Today's session is devoted to remembrance of Bishop Pieronek. My name is Kazimierz Sowa. I am Catholic priest, representative also of Foundation of Bishop Pieronek, the organizer of this meeting tonight and this year's conference. Prime Minister Suchocka, thank you very much for being here with us. Welcome.
Która znalazła czas i pomiędzy
Thank you for making it possible, finding time in between your journeys, between, I understand, Poland, Poznań and Kiev. You're going to be online, present in Kiev as well. Thank you very much for being in Kraków here with us. Professor Butilione, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us too.
Wypróbowanego przyjaciela,
Friends.
człowieka, który jest niesamowicie
Many years of friendship demonstrated by Professor Butilione, friend of Poles, of Poland, friend of Pope John Paul II,
biskupa Tadeusza.
friend of Bishop Tadeusz Pieronek. Bishop Pieronek and his Europe is the title of our evening event. When inviting you here, we mentioned that we would start with a short film. Let us have a look at the short film we have prepared.
Żadnym bohaterem nie czuję, jestem jednym.
I do not feel to be a hero. I'm just one of many normal people. One of those somewhat twisted, perhaps. Film footage of Bishop Pieronek was provided by Waldemar Janda. The statement of Bishop Pieronek comes from wgmedia.eu. Director of the Pontifical University on September the 23rd, 2021, after his conversation with Archbishop Marek Jędraszewski, decided to withdraw from the organization of Names Day evening, Bishop Pieronek and his Europe. As a result of this decision, production of the film planned for today's occasion has been stopped. Bishop Pieronek Foundation has taken over responsibility for the organization of this evening.
Nie dlatego,
Very short film, let me explain again. We planned to have a longer film.
jemu współczesnych do
Well, certainly we would be able to speak to many people he met in his life, speak about him and his life. But simply let me explain again, as you have noticed, we had some problems organizing tonight's evening. We might pretend saying that nothing really happened and use except the film by Szymon Wróbel about Bishop Pieronek, still very much topical with excellent impressions. Film still filmed in the apartment of Bishop Pieronek in many places. He had links to, but I think that sometimes we have to look at the reality also, the one related to the church and the spirit and truth. And we should not pretend, perhaps saying that something happens that we are not really paying attention to. I hope you will understand that our foundation has decided not to create facts that in a way might try to show us a better reality than it really is. Well, the students actually who were supposed to speak about that, professor, also rector, because as you know, John Paul II University has links to the Pontifical University, and the rector 1998-2004 of this university, 6 years, was Bishop Pieronek of this university. So the students, former students, were not able to present their artistic impressions. We will just speak here without actually watching the film that has not, unfortunately, been prepared for the reasons mentioned before.
zawodowym.
I suggest we therefore start our conversation about Bishop Tadeusz Pieronek. I will speak to people who have met Bishop Pieronek also as Christians meeting Bishop Tadeusz. Our guests have also seen the role that has been played by Bishop Pieronek in the Polish Church. Let me start with a quotation I found it in one of the memoirs written after the death of Bishop Pieronek. Janusz Poniewierski, editor-in-chief of Znak, among others, he wrote, Pieronek loved church in a wise way. When he believed it was necessary and right, he would defend the church. When he saw problems, he would not remain silent. He would simply speak very clearly about some truth, very hard truth sometimes. So he was a courageous man. Let me try to explain perhaps why Bishop Pieronek, why did not he make the whole Polish church so brave? Professor, if you could speak about that. What is his courage? Why is this courage lacking now in the Polish church?
When I met Bishop Pieronek, we were both very young. I think he was not yet a bishop. And it was the time of communism. We have lived together a wonderful adventure, a marvelous adventure. The adventure of the great witness given by the Polish nation in front of power, led by John Paul II, who became the Pope, that shattered the disorder of power that had been imposed upon Europe with the Treaty of Yalta. And a dream that seemed impossible became reality, a new Europe. It was a tremendous privilege, and we shall never be grateful enough to the Holy Spirit for having given us the possibility of living this adventure. Nevertheless, when communism fell, I think many of us thought, well, now we have won, and we have the right to continue from victory to victory, from glory to new and greater glory. And then, all of a sudden, we changed of epoch. John Paul II was the point of arrival of an historical epoch, and we entered into a new epoch. And in the new epoch, we cannot take with ourselves all the merits we had gained in the old epoch. We must start again from nothing, from scraps. And we must confront us with a new world in which there is a new generation that has to find their own way towards the great values. And their own way is not our way. And they don't understand a lot of things that to us seem to be apparent. And for them they are not. And then we stand in need of listening to a young generation that does not know. And of course they do not know. They don't stand in need of knowing. They have not the duty of knowing. And it is not even enough to say, we have the duty of telling them. Yes, we have the duty of telling them. I have read a magazine, I shall not make the title, of young Catholics. There are a lot of stupid things on, or rather against, John Paul II. Shall we be angry to them? Or shall we ask ourselves, what is the point of contact from which we must start in order to tell them the story? And not only to tell them the story, to be together with them in march towards the truth of their time. There is one truth, but in each time this truth appears in a different form. What is the form of truth in our time? In their time, that is also our time, because we are still alive. I think that is the problem. And this is the problem of the Polish Church. We are in a new historical epoch. The world has changed dramatically. And the problems of our time are not those with which we were used to be confronted. And the Polish Church, or the world church, should become conscious of this. I stop here for a while.
A jaka była osobista rola biskupa Pieronka?
And what is the personal role of Bishop Pieronek in this understanding? What is your approach here?
I think that Pieronek now would be exactly on the border, talking to the young people, trying to understand what is their world, what are the values that are apparent to them, leading from those values they see to those they do not see and are equally necessary. I think he would now, he will be asking himself, well, let us say homosexuality is a grievous sin. Nevertheless, homosexual people, men, really existing men in flesh and blood, how shall we talk to them? What kind of witness can we give to them? How can we become their friends? They will never believe to the moral doctrine of the church if they feel that this doctrine is against them. They must learn that this doctrine is for them in order for them to be happy. How can we show this? I don't know. But I think that Pieronek, and perhaps Pieronek either would not know, but he would try to understand, to enter into the soul of these people. I made one example because today it is particularly in the center of discussion. We have thousands of such examples.
Będziemy odwoływać się bardzo często do prywatnych.
We will be referring many times to different personal, maybe not private, but different memories you have meeting Bishop Pieronek, Prime Minister. You also have met many times Bishop Pieronek, maybe not as early as Professor Buttiglione. I understand you met Bishop Pieronek somewhat later. Tell us more perhaps about Bishop Pieronek. From the very beginning, did you see when you met Bishop Pieronek, did you see a courageous person? As it seemed, well, he would always straight away call a spade, sometimes speaking about subjects and problems that are not very popular, of those that for the general public were not really considered subjects that bishops would speak about them.
Proszę Państwa,
Ladies and gentlemen,
dziękuję za zaproszenie do tej
thank you
dyskusji, ale właśnie
for the invitation. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to discuss these things. And I've just realized when Rocco Buttiglione was speaking that there is this free seat waiting for Professor Zoll, but actually we should have a seat for a young person here.
spotykamy, należąc do tej
Because we belong to the same generation and we keep meeting among ourselves and we talk about certain people that bring back certain memories and the way we think. The essence here is to know what the young people's message is, how they see Bishop Pieronek, because in recent years he would speak to people who are here and now. And what is left? How do they understand it? That's something that I find missing. I do teach students and I meet them quite often and I say, listen, we arrange the world according to the way we thought. But maybe you want to furnish it differently. We can only give you some directions. So we need to learn, but also continuity is necessary. A certain vision is needed too. So basically we have people who knew him. So, well, these are, among middle-aged people. So how Bishop Pieronek would communicate with the young people? I can hear myself there because there is interpretation.
Ja bym powiedziała, że postać biskupa Pieronka to jest postać niezwykle złożona.
Bishop Pieronek was a very complex person.
Cechę charakteru miał zawsze odwagę, jak przychodził.
He had always been courageous. When he had a project, he would defend it, irrespectively of whether people liked it or not.
Jakie jest moje pierwsze spotkanie z biskupem Pieronkiem?
So my first meeting with Tadeusz. By the way, I was quite surprised. He reminded me of that. We met first at the end of 1989, the beginning of 1990. It was the first parliament here in Poland, contractual, and I sat on this committee and we were supposed to draft a new constitution. Well, basically those disputes have continued ever since. Father Pieronek participated in the works of the team that I headed. and he represented the Episcopal Conference. He was a lawyer. He was well prepared, a well-trained lawyer, so he had been delegated to do this work in this team. Well, basic principles, the truth. So the year was 1990. I still remember it. I moderated, Tadeusz was here, and we would consult quite often. The discussion about the preamble started then. At the time, he was a priest, he was not a bishop back then. He represented the Episcopal Conference, and he presented his position. We were there, behind this table, and we were not sure how to write this preamble. What I suggested, said Pieronek, was that we would start it the traditional way, in the name of the Father, the Virgin Mary, so the whole Trinity. And I will never forget it. You turned back to me and you said, "Isn't it a bit too much?" you said. That's what he told me. So he actually told it to me once. I didn't remember it. And then I realized something. Maybe it was a tad too much, but he knew how to say it. He knew how to admit that. Back then, we started our work together, and we would understand each other very well in all circumstances. He was a lawyer. As a lawyer, he understood certain things, and he knew how to have a dispute. Now, it was really important back then. These were not personal disputes. It was not about, beating another person on the head with a stick. These were discussions about the substance of things. It was about something. Both Bishop Pieronek and his disputants were able to simply give up certain things. But he knew how to speak, and his tongue was quite sharp. He was sharp-tongued. So even if he did go to compromise, if he gave up, he would use quite a strong language. So a question was asked. Had he always been like that? Shocking? Well, it varied. I was shocked by the fact about this whole preamble thing, so he shocked me saying that. Because this is where we were back then. And basically, we had to prepare this constitution, and the bishop's position was important. What else? You will remember, as you sit here, especially the lawyers present here, will remember it. He was the lawyer's chaplain. He was their chaplain. He would meet people, organize meetings, and there, at the center, would be people who would simply discuss those current legal issues. He knew something, he felt something. He knew that we would get lost in this freedom of ours. He knew that we would try to interpret it in a number of ways. He was trying to look for certain reference points. This framework that would give us knowledge, but, also there would be bearing points that would make it possible for us to have this discourse that would continue. Three essential things were important for him: Poland, the Church, and Europe. Now, there were some critical voices that you could hear. He would be critical whenever he saw that things were going the wrong direction, and whatever was happening could damage one of those three important values. And we need to remember that. So these were the compasses that would help us to do our work, and thus we were able to find a common language, common ground. So yes, he would shock various people at various stages of his life, different people of different opinions. Was he a person that would make other people courageous? Would he share this courage of his in those disputes? Well, I'm not sure whether he would be contagious, so to speak, whether this courage was contagious, but he would add people courage. He would show others that you could be brave. He would show that this kind of stance should be promoted. I have prepared those two excerpts.
Dokładnie, ile to jest? 4 lata temu, 2017.
2017, October the 25th, 4 years ago, Bishop Pieronek received an award for civic courage. It was awarded, it was presented by a foundation. Paradowska's foundation, I believe. So he got it for civic courage. It was really important to stress both courage and the fact that it was about civic courage. What happened before that was an honorary doctorate for courage and persistence in his search for truth. So this is where these are the focal points in his life. Courage on the one hand, and on the other, this civic courage, civic bravery. What he tried to do in his brave thinking of his was to shape civic approach. What does it mean to be a citizen? And at times you need to speak critically when you see evil rather than run away out of fear. And this is what he was trying to teach people. And the question is whether, well, basically those young people who met him, they would continue this way of acting, thinking. You know, we who met him would do just that. When he undermined things, it meant that those things can be discussed. They are not taboo. It's not an accident that in both awards, it would say that the awards was for his courage and bravery in his search of truth, civic courage. It's a set of virtues that you should have. By all means, it's true. Madam Prime Minister, you talked about his chaplaincy because he was a chaplain to lawyers. So Bishop Pieronek, he ran these meditations and you had Rzepliński and Przyłębska in the same room today, unthinkable. And back in the day, many various people, different people, would work with him. These conferences that would happen here, look at those volumes, these publications, look at the guests. He would invite everybody, and many people would be outraged. And he said, you know, but this is what I think, even though some people didn't like it. So controversies. I mean the people. Yesterday I did have a 3-hour-long dispute, actually, a bit of a quarrel. So here we will also discuss the third area, namely Europe. Yesterday we had a conversation and we also talked with Rocco Buttiglione. Professor, you said today Pieronek would not think about what he has to say on what is happening here and now in Poland. His thoughts would move ahead, somewhere further. Where would it be then? Where would he be looking for those new areas where certain issues could be displayed and shown in a different light? Professor?
He will be very attentive to this new Pope, to Pope Francis. There are two positions of Pope Francis I think Pieronek would completely agree with. The first one is we are in a change of epoch. We are not in an epoch of change. Epochs are changing. What does it mean that an epoch is changing? I had a dialogue with some young people a few days ago here in Poland. And one of them said, well, the world is changing. An old civilization is dying. And the Catholic Church is dying with the old civilization. And I said, well, yes, I agree with you. Hegel teaches us that there are epochs in history in which the spirit draws itself out of the existing institutions. And the institutions become old and collapse and die. And then the spirit moves towards the world and creates new institutions. They are the objective spirit of a new historical epoch. We are in a transition of historical epochs. And of course, Christianity should die, like the old world. But beware, Christianity, the church, already died more than once in history. Once Christianity died in the 6th century, the Roman Empire collapsed and the church collapsed with the Roman Empire. And God sent to the world Saint Benedict, and the new Christianity arose. And then Christianity collapsed again in the 12th century with the Patars, the Catars, the Albigenses, and all the heresies of the 12th century. And the structure of the empire collapsed, the new empire collapsed. And the church was resurrected by the Spirit of God through St. Francis and St. Dominic. And then the church died again in the 16th century. And St. Carlo Borromeo, St. Ignatius, St. Filippo Neri, and you had a new church. Now, we must look for the saints of our time. And we must not be so much worried of defending spaces of power that we may have. It is good to defend spaces of power sometimes in history. You have to do that. It is human. But it cannot be the first preoccupation of the church. The first preoccupation of the church should be to activate processes. Saint Benedict, did not protect, did not try to defend one small part of the political power of the church or of the empire. He created a reality that took the heritage, the cultural heritage, and created a new world. The same did St. Francis or St. Charles Borromeo. And so the problem is, where are the saints of our time, first? And second, which processes can we activate? We have a defensive attitude, and we should not have that. The church, I think I heard this from, perhaps I heard this from Pieronek, perhaps not, I'm not sure. But the church has 3 tasks. Must preach the gospel to the unfaithful, must defend the faith of the faithful, must preserve the moral order of the country. And they are in this order. First of all, the church must preach the gospel. Preaching the gospel, you activate processes. And then, activating processes, you can also protect the faith of the faithful and also preserve the moral order of the country. If you turn the three tasks around and you start with the defense of the moral order, people will tell you, the young people will tell you, that this moral order is boring. We don't like it. Like St. Paul, the law, only the law is boring, is unsustainable. The grace of Jesus Christ, the presence of Jesus Christ among us, makes of the law the object, not of our hatred, but of our love. So that is, I think, the great challenge. It was the same challenge then, in a different form. And it is the challenge today.
No, to bardzo ciekawy jest ten fresk historyczny, który pan tutaj
The very interesting thing that you did, you presented this bit of history and 3 dimensions, 3 duties of the church. The question is,
nie ma, albo
where is the church of the voice of the church missing, or where can we hear them?
I don't know. I think
Z pana perspektywy, jako
From your point of view, as a scholar
Europy Zachodniej, bo
and a
być może nasza
Western European, because our perspective will be even different.
only a perspective of the West. Pieronek spoke about Europe. It was the time in which we had to speak about Europe to overcome the narrowness of a situation in which we all felt prisoners. But today we live in a world that is globalizing. Globalization is not against the church. The church is Catholic. Catholic means global. And we have a Latin American Pope. What does it mean to have a Latin American Pope? Pieronek would ask this question, as he asked with John Paul II, the question, what does it mean today that God has chosen a son of the Polish nation as Pope right now? And he found an answer. He did not give an answer. He found an answer. He activated a process in which we realized why the providence had wanted a Polish Pope. So now we live in a church that is largely non-European. Only 1/3 of the Europeans live, of the Catholics live in Europe. On the other hand, Europe is becoming more and more secular, but the world is becoming more and more religious. The world is becoming more and more religious, and we are no more in the avant-garde of the world. No? What does it mean today
Co oznacza tak naprawdę dla nas wszystkich,
for Poland? Shall we defend ourselves, or shall we have the courage of going? John Paul II said once, "Duc in altum," go towards the high sea and see what happens, and have confidence. Do not be afraid. We are all afraid. In this world of globalization, we are afraid. We do not believe in the mission. A church that is not missionary is not a church.
To jest też ciekawe, że pan tutaj często się odwołuje do...
Very interesting. You're referring very often to the thoughts, ideas of John Paul II.
Dzisiaj w Polsce też sytuację, w której
In Poland, we've got a situation in which,
dorobek jest negowany.
well, those thoughts, this heritage sometimes is negated, or there are question marks, serious question marks are often posed.
Jak sobie prześledzimy,
Quite interesting, I think, because if we take a closer look at the conference agendas of almost 20 conferences organized by Bishop Pieronek
pontyfikatu, czyli do 2005
during the pontificate of John Paul II until 2005, but also later, we often referred very often to the heritage, spiritual, intellectual heritage of John Paul II. Maybe this is something that we are now lacking.
Zostawmy trochę ten kontekst.
Let us leave this historical context for a moment. Very interesting, I admit.
Ciągle do tego,
We might be tempted to refer to what happened, what was, but Prime Minister,
biskupem chodzącym
very often Bishop Pieronek was discussed or referred to as a bishop who would wander, not being lost, but searching for new ideas, new places, looking for places where the voice of the church is not clearly heard or is missing perhaps. What are those places? What are those perspectives, unusual approaches and perspectives you'd like to draw attention to?
Czy to można nazwać
I'm not sure whether one can call it those less obvious, undiscovered places. What I quite liked, and what you said, the quote
pana profesora
referred to by Rocco Buttiglione,
nie lękajcie się.
do not fear, or thou shalt not fear.
Niestety,
Well,
muszę to powiedzieć,
unfortunately,
ale bardzo wiele
I'm sorry, but I have to say it,
w postawie
very often
Kościoła widzę
the church as it is now and the approach of the church is quite different. It's filled with fear. The church itself seems to be afraid. And I think Bishop Pieronek was not afraid, did not have this fear. That is why perhaps people were afraid of him. And,
on jest
well,
klasyfikowany.
he is seen classified in different ways today. And I keep thinking about the film, or not seeing the film because the film has not been made, as you know. The film is missing.
Co mogło spowodować?
What's the reasoning behind actually the decision? Because when you have a look at the character of Bishop Pieronek, there was not a single, I think, reason why such reaction would be justified.
Życiem
his whole life. In his life, he was faithful to the teaching of the church. I stress, the teaching of the church. Some actually might not know it, but in his moral views, many of them, he was actually very conservative. Not many people realize that. Today, of course, we use the term conservative very often. It has a political meaning, perhaps today, the word conservative. But in what Bishop Pieronek was saying, it's traditional, another word, perhaps traditional approach to Christian morality. Some of his statements, interviews were quite rigid, and the liberals didn't like that. They were very conservative, and some liberal media actually did not expect him to be so traditional. Because, as I said at the beginning, he was courageous enough to make statements whenever they referred to his deep beliefs. He was not afraid simply to present his view. And again, he was very much living according to the words of John Paul II, and do not fear. And speaking about this going astray to different, less obvious places, perhaps we do not quite still understand the message of the Second Vatican Council. But Bishop Pieronek was a student at that time. He was in Rome during the council. He, I think, understood very well the ideas of the Second Vatican Council. And he feared that if some of those ideas go missing, we might perhaps be led astray in a way, and the Church will not have this depth of breath that is needed and has to be based on the ideas of the Second Vatican Council. Here we turn also to the discussion on the Concordat. Bishop Pieronek played a very important role here. He was, as you know, a lawyer at that time, representing the church. I had very close links to him. He was also working on the documents related to the Concordat. And I remember that at that time this basic principle was created. It can be found in Article 25 of the Polish Constitution as well, the independence, autonomy of both subjects, but also their cooperation, working together for the common good. And let me go back here to what I keep referring to all the time, as you asked, what is missing perhaps today, what the Church is not speaking about, where it might be going astray somewhat. I would say that this is this category of the common good. It seems that this category has gone lost in the contemporary world, at least here. I'm saying we because I'm also a member of the Church, but it looks like our thinking, our approach is based on partisan interests, not the common good. And the current situation is such that, well, whoever thinks somewhat differently about the general good, but not thinking along party lines, then some would object that they do not really take good care of the common good. But Bishop Pieronek always was trying to focus on the common good outside party lines. 2 or 3 years ago, I remember at one of the conferences when I was asked where our church should be more engaged in, and I said at that time that the church needs to always, anytime, clearly define what the common good is in a given moment. The common good is not something abstract, but it has to be defined in different conditions. Today, this is what we understand by the common good. Tomorrow, it might be different. I remember 14 or maybe 17 already. I remember I said that we have to take care of the common good. And the common good is the principle of the state of law. The state of law is our common good. Cardinal Nitsch was there, and I think a few bishops. And actually, I was speaking there in public that the Church should do its best to try to define the principle of the state of law as the common good. What is its meaning, where the borders are, and what kind of cooperation is possible between the Church and the state. Again, the state, not the Church and one party, but the whole state, to take good care of this common good. And at that time, I think this was also what Bishop Pieronek was able to see, the common good. He knew that the church has to overcome some limits, perhaps limitations, so that it is possible to define this common good. When this did not happen, then Bishop Pieronek would show his character using very strong language sometimes. I know many people did not like such strong comments, but they should have been treated perhaps as warnings that something was going wrong. It seems to me that Bishop Pieronek was able to use the language of journalism, sometimes very strong comments. For this reason, some did not quite like him, perhaps, or some treated his voice as political voice. Well, additionally, one could say on the margin, I spoke to him several times about his outlook, how he sees politics, and what was quite typical. He said he always presented that he was not afraid of the world of politics. He always said that he has to speak out about political issues because politics, the way he treated it, was something more than the area of conflict or cooperation between political parties, as you said, Madam Prime Minister. And his quotation, if I may quote him 2 months before his death, he said, "The reason I'm bishop is not to be afraid. I want to be myself. I hate lies. I'm going to speak about what is the truth. Sometimes that might be wrong, but I'm never going to lie." Such approach and the truth, the way he understood it, also a duty to speak out sometimes, not to be silent. Yes, this is exactly what we are saying. Not to remain silent and try to always speak out and perhaps explain what should be this area of common care between the state and the church in general and in details as well. This was the core of the formula that we've got in our concordats from Gaudium et Spes, exactly in the spirit of the Council, because each Catholic is a citizen of this country. So a Catholic citizen at the same time belonging to the state. So two structures, the church and the state, they have to work together so that nobody feels marginalized within this common good, the state as the common good. And here the role of the church is very important, and this is what Bishop Pieronek was in a very consistent way speaking about. And as he was using his language, colorful language, sometimes, well, I myself was having problems accepting the language. Personally, I told him, well, we were very honest in our discussions. I said that, Bishop, if you had used language that would not be so sharp, might have been better. He never quarreled actually, but he never actually followed my advice.
A jak był postrzegany biskup Pieronek?
Professor, how was Bishop Pieronek seen by people similar to you, perhaps, people very positive attitudes to Poland, knowing Poland? I think that we had to have some interest, of course, in the situation in Poland and the church here. What was your attitude? How did you see Bishop Pieronek here in the context of Poland and the church? Well, how did you, as a professor, what was your approach to Professor Pieronek? How did you see him?
He was not a politician, but he was one of the few bishops who understood politics. I appreciate very much, I recognize very much myself in what Hanna Sukowska has just said. What is politics? Politics is not the translation of the Christian social doctrine in practice. This has been said very often, but it is false. It is false because politics, first of all, is the capacity of creating an order of the day. The order of the day is the problem or the problems that are ripe to be solved, that are ripe in the soul of the people. So you have to read the soul of the people and see which steps in the right directions they are ready to make. And then you must ask them to make exactly those steps. There are things that in one moment are very easy, in another moment are impossible. And you must see which steps have to be taken. If you ask of the people to take steps they are not mature to take, they are not ready to take, the result is that the people will not follow you. And it is important to read this in the soul of the people. It is important for the politician, but it is important also for the bishop, because the church has a responsibility towards the nation. And now I see it is very difficult for the church to find church leaders who have this capacity of reading the soul of the people. Of course, you must listen a lot in order to be able to read in the soul of the people. You must listen a lot. And Pieronek was a man who listened. And this, he was a true disciple of John Paul II. He listened before speaking. Very often church leaders speak before listening. And then they do not get in touch with the soul of the people. So the memory that I have is of a priest, later a bishop, but a priest and a bishop who was in touch with the soul of the people and understood what was in the soul of the people. We have given great battles. We have won, we have lost. I think it is important to remind one great battle we have lost. It was the battle on the European Constitution. We wanted the European Constitution, we did not have any. First, we wanted to have the Christian values in the European Constitution. Well, really, I made an amendment. I did not want the Christian values. I wanted the Judeo-Christian, Latin, classical Latin, Greek values, and also the great teaching of the Enlightenment. They did not want it. And so we had no values in the Constitution, we had no Constitution, and we had a Europe that was not built upon solidarity. Why did we want, I remember Pieronek wanted the Christian values in the Constitution. I remember why. We talked once about it. It was not so much the history of the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages are far away. It was the fact that the great witness to truth given by the Polish people and consolidated in the word Solidarność, the great witness given by other peoples in the time of persecution, be recognized by Europe. Europe, the new Europe, builds upon the fundament made by also this great historical experience. And it was not only an historical experience of rediscovery of Christian values. I remember the underground university. Some of you are old enough to remember the underground university. I'm sorry there is not Thomas Halik here now. I remember in Prague, also in Prague it was a kind of underground university. And I remember talking with Jan Patočka, with Radim Palos, with Paul Ricoeur, Emmanuel Levinas, who went there to talk about not just Christian values, European values, Christian values, but also the great heritage of Plato, the famous book Plato and Europe of Patočka. And this was refused, and we had only a Europe that wanted to be more than economic, but nevertheless could not formulate what it was beyond economy. So we lost great battles. Nevertheless, the worst is not that you lose a battle in the open field. The worst is that you lose the self-consciousness in that battle. Many Polish people, not Pieronek, many Polish people, felt the consciousness of being Europe, of having a great heritage that needed to be transmitted to Europe, felt the consciousness of being protagonists of a dialogue on the future of Europe. And they said, well, we will defend our values by ourselves. We will close ourselves in our fortress, we will defend our spaces, and we will preserve the values. That's not possible. The values live in the dialogue with values of other countries. The values live if they are not transformed into objects, into things. Values are processes. Values live if you keep activating processes. And if you consider your opponents not as the enemies, but those who need the values you have and still did not see it. And then you must help them to see. Think of the great speech of John Paul II in Paris at the UNESCO. I think that was what Pieronek had. He had an historical mind. He had an historical mind because he loved people. And you meet history through people, through concrete people. I don't know whether I answered the question.
Dlaczego Europa była ważna dla Pieronka?
Why was Europe important for
Bishop
Pieronek?
What was?
Why the Europe was the important for the Bishop Pieronek? Europe.
Well, I think Europe was important because Poland is Europe. Poland is Europe, and Europe goes also beyond the borders of Poland. And I remember discussing with him, with John Paul II. We need an organization of Europe. We need an organization of Europe that goes beyond the Union. And we dreamt of a Europe with two lungs, the Eastern and the Western lungs. Of course, today we cannot say this, because after the aggression of Russia against the Ukraine, after what has happened in Belarus, to imagine that we may have an Eastern European community is impossible now. Nevertheless, we must find a way of talking to the Russians, of talking to these people, because they also belong to Europe. We must ask them to be Europeans. So I think that we have to give a battle in Europe for our values. But in Europe, Polish people must stay Polish, must not accept to become a part of an undifferentiated, cosmopolitan new Europe in which there are no nations, no communities. No, you must defend your values. But in Europe, because out of Europe you cannot. It is just an illusion. I think this is what today Pieronek would say. And I think he would say also another thing. He would say, that is not enough. Europe makes the same error that the Polish people make, or some Polish people make. The same error. Europe is concentrated upon itself. And this is the time of great dialogue. I said with Russia, that is Europe, with China, with Latin America. The majority, almost the majority of Catholics live in Latin America. And the world is changing. There are enormous concentration of power. China, Russia, well, Russia not so much, but Russia, let us say, United States, India, and Europe. We are becoming the objects of history. How can we give witness to our culture if this culture does not succeed in uniting us? Perhaps we should reinterpret our culture, and we should talk to Latin America. Together with the dialogue with Latin America today is absolutely important. What have we to learn from Latin America? If the Pope, if the Holy Spirit chose a Latin American Pope, is it possible that the Holy Spirit wants us to listen to Latin America? And Europe needs a dialogue with Latin America. Europe needs a dialogue with the Mediterranean countries. I think Pieronek would speak of Europe, but not just of the Europe as we think it, would speak also of that is beyond. And we did take migration. I remember the European Council of 2000 in Barcelona. We had a politics for migrations. We said, you cannot preserve welfare building walls. You preserve welfare enlarging the area of welfare. We must attract in the area of welfare the Ukraine, Russia, the neighboring country. We need a neighborhood policy. Within a neighborhood policy, you may have a reasonable migration policy. Without a neighborhood policy, you cannot have a reasonable migration policy, because you cannot tell them all, come to us, and you cannot kill them when they try to come to you. You must create jobs in those countries. That's the need. John Paul II used to say that Europe needed to be united in order to give witness to her values in the world of tomorrow. And this is an essential part of the mission of Europe today. I think Pieronek will say, Polish is European. Europe is also Polish. And this Europe should talk to the other countries of the world, should make a proposal for a new world order, because we need a new world order.
Pani premier, ale chciałbym...
Jesteśmy już
Madam Prime Minister.
Jesteśmy już w świecie, ale blisko tego tematu wywołanego przez profesora Butiliona, czyli Europy, ale chciałbym zwrócić uwagę na coś bardzo konkretnego, bo biskup Pieronek był wielkim orędownikiem integracji europejskiej, także w biskup, który na przykład pojawiał się na obradach Komisji Sejmowej
be present
Unii Europejskiej,
at the
kiedy jeszcze Polska nie była przed akcesją, prowadził z politykami
Commission
rozmowy. Znaczy, on nie traktował
sessions.
tylko
He would discuss various things with various politicians. And what Professor Butilione said is very important, the European identity, and that Poland is reflected there. We can find reflected our tradition, our identity. But there's this political dimension, the European integration. It's also there. Ironically, those conferences that, when was it? 2001, the first one was organized? It was born also because the Church needs to speak on issues that are strictly political. European integration was a political, economical and social project. It covered a number of areas. To some extent, it entered this new ground, it covered new ground. I mean, he did with his engagement. All of us did that. This was new ground that we were covering, and the bishop understood it very well. Just as we said.
To poczucie takie w tym najbardziej pozytywnym sensie obywatelskości.
He had this sense of citizenship in the best sense of the word. And we can get lost when we think about Europe. He understood it. What kind of time was it? I was an active politician in difficult moments, to be honest. And I, and many of us present here, still remember that first there was this enthusiasm. We want to join Europe. And then you saw other trends, more skeptical trends. You saw this European skepticism being born that was actually cherished by certain political parties who claimed that joining Europe, this European integration, could rid us of our identity and culture, our personality, one might even say. These arguments were quite strong. I still remember it, because you had to struggle with it at a number of parliamentary meetings. And this is when we fought for these imponderabilia. So Bishop Pieronek's involvement, his stance, sprang from what Rocco Butilione said, namely, he acted, he organized conferences, he participated in various events, he was present in the parliament, he spoke as an advisor, as an expert, and through all that, he tried to explain things. That this Polish identity has roots in the European identity. This is where it comes from. And unfortunately, this trend never disappeared. We are still not quite sure. Where are we going? Are we going on one or the other side of this net, so to speak, of this fence? This concern was very strong in the 90s, and one would think that after 30 years all these doubts would be gone, but it turns out that this uncertainty, this hesitancy is still there. This is what Pieronek was afraid of. Now, the European Constitution, yes, there was a problem. What it was about words or ideology, but this is not how I saw it. This European Constitution dispute, I'm talking about the Europe dimension. The way I saw it was that it was about showing certain things, namely, we stem from Europe, from what used to be called Christianity before we started calling it Europe. So when you fail to mention the Christian roots in this treaty, was considered a mistake. Professor Geremek spoke on that. He said, when you fail to mention the Christian roots in the European Constitution, not even values, but just the roots, is an obvious denial of the truth. And Pieronek fought for truth. He always did. So it was also about actually mentioning that in the Constitution. Now, there, the authorities, or rather the authorities and the church worked hand in hand, and the Polish government defended this reference, even though it was elected. So it was Marek Belka's government, left of center, and they could rise above their own certain views and to fight for our roots. And this is the foundation of our identity. Only thus can you consider our further engagement, global engagement. So you, Father, asked a question, put a question to Pieronek. Why was Europe so important for Pieronek? That's why, when we fail to have these roots, we'll break away from what shaped us, and we would sway in this other direction. Krzysztof Zanussi, the Polish director, would quite often define it this way: the border between the Western and Eastern Europe, it's about how you cook broth. In the East, you put meat into hot water and you boil it. In the West, you have vegetables and you have this flavor. This is the cultural difference between these two parts of Europe. I actually reference that quite often. Maybe it's a simplification, but there is a grain of truth in it. So Bishop Pieronek didn't want us to remain in the part where you cook broth without any vegetables. Right. Okay, so let us keep going. A question both to you, Madam Prime Minister, but also to you, Professor. Father Pieronek, Bishop Pieronek, would he keep silent when people are talking about Polexit? And so much is being done to make Polexit happen. I believe that Polexit will not happen. It will not take place. This commentator wrote, we will be in the middle and outside. We don't have anything, but we have something. Because, you know, when you leave, a number of jobs are taken, European parliamentary jobs, and some people are even ready to sacrifice that, theoretically speaking, only in theory. Right. So what about Pieronek's silence on the subject of Polexit?
He would be silent or he would say something. I cannot imagine that he would even consider the possibility of signing on Polexit. He would say, here we are, here the destiny has put us, and we have to fight here. And we have to fight for Polish values and for European values, for the salvation of the Polish soul and for the salvation of the European soul. He would not imagine a way out of Poland. Poland gets out of Europe to go where? In Asia?
Anglicy myśleli podobnie.
The British thought similarly. The English people thought similarly.
The English people, they think that they stand in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and they can choose between one side and the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Somebody should make them aware of the fact that the channel are 20 miles and from Bristol to New York there are 4,000 miles. It is different. But the case of Poland is different. They can dream of an Anglo-Saxon community with Australia, New Zealand, and United States. What shall Poland dream of? if Poland gets out of Europe. You want to continue the wars and the enterprises of the Lithuanians when they dreamt of creating a new Mongol empire stretching up to China? Is that the alternative of Poland?
Wszyscy są bardzo optymistyczni. Obyśmy
Yes,
się nie
everybody is
obudzili
being
czasem,
very optimistic,
jednak,
and we can only hope
zaskoczeni,
that
tak bym
we
to
are
powiedział.
not caught
Obyśmy
off
się nie obudzili
guard.
zaskoczeni.
That's my hope.
Zatem pan profesor ma na pewno ten
Professor,
przewagę nad nami, że nie ogląda
You have the upper hand here because you do not follow the Polish national TV
Proszę państwa, jeszcze mamy trochę czasu
and the official Polish news outlets.
zapytać państwa. czy
So a
też
question.
poprosić może
This is an opportunity to ask you, maybe to ask you to reflect on things. And it's not about, you know, biography, because we would stay here till midnight. You know, I mean, this is what a good names day is like, right? But
wyglądałby taki swoisty dekalog europejskich wartości według biskupa Pieronka?
according to Bishop Pieronek, what would be the 10 most important values, such 10 commandments, European commandments? You knew him.
Państwa współpracowało z nim albo
You have worked together with him. You had talked to him.
to nie jest nawet debata, tylko raczej właśnie
This is not a debate, by the way, that we are having. We are trying to
na to dziedzictwo, które
look at Pieronek's legacy here. So, according to Bishop Pieronek, which values would he point to? The European values, cultural values, spiritual values, religious values? A very broad spectrum is what we want to hear.
Ja zacznę, ponieważ w tej rozmowie
I will
zabrakło
begin.
mi jednej bardzo ważnej cechy księdza biskupa i wydaje mi się, że ona
Believe
mogła
that there is one
zostać,
important thing that is
właśnie
missing,
taką podstawą
a
do
feature of Biskup Pieronek, of Bishop Pieronek,
otwartość.
and
On był niezwykle
openness.
otwarty na
He
drugiego
was very
człowieka,
open to
innego
other
człowieka,
people, to
na
the other,
problemy ludzkie,
to
na
people's
wszystkie
issues,
trudne tematy.
to
I ta
any
otwartość
difficult
na
subjects.
innego,
And this
na
openness to
innych,
the other or to
mogłaby zostać
others
takim punktem
could
wyjścia
be
dla,
a starting
zjednoczonej
point
Europy, tak?
for
Która jest
united
bardzo
Europe,
różna i jednoczy
which is very diverse.
różnorodność.
And it brings together this diversity.
Jan Paweł II
There is this papal document.
Na końcu to synod o Europie, prawda? I on
There's
w tym
this
dokumencie napisał,
Council on Europe, and there we read Europe equals openness.
Moim zdaniem jedno z zapomnianych haseł.
And it is a slogan or a thought of John Paul II that people tend to forget about openness then. This is the first bit, the first part of these 10 important things. Ambassador, Mr. Ambassador, in the first row, I mean, I believe that you wanted to share something.
Do mikrofonu.
Could you please use the mic? The mic doesn't seem to be working. That was an interpreter's comment. The mic seems not to be working.
Także wydaje mi się, że ważną cechą biskupa Pieronka
Now, what characterized Bishop Pieronek was curiosity. It hasn't been mentioned. And it led him to openness. Openness, curiosity. You know, there is this Polish saying that curiosity is the first step that will lead you to, well, some people say, to hell, others to learning about the world. So let's have those 10 commandments according to Bishop Pieronek. Ms. Bielecka, the first row. Yes, the best pupils sit in the first row. The dialogue. We have already mentioned that he was very open and curious. So that kind of stance leads you to dialogue, which is the foundation for communication and understanding of whatever cannot be understood. When we reject the dialogue, we know what's going to happen, right? Great.
Ksiądz Aleksander, jak przystało na kolejnego wzorowego ucznia?
Poczucie humoru, a więc dystans do siebie.
To możemy chyba większości z nas...
Sense of humor, distance to yourself, I think this is something you have to draw attention to. Yes, certainly. All of us, knowing Bishop Pieronek, we know about it. Distance to yourself, yes, especially people who are leaders in a society, they need to have distance to oneself. Yes, distance to oneself. I found when preparing a laudation for Bishop Pieronek, I remember what he said about authorities. I think this also shows his distance to himself. Someone asked him, Bishop, your openness, Bishop, very often there is so much hate directed to you because of that. How can you stand so much hatred? And here at that time, it was a context, I think, speaking about authorities. And he said that authorities that are laughed at wrongly, if it's authentic, doesn't change. It's like a road sign. You might complain, but still it is showing you the way to go. I think this is a very important idea. Well, of course, there can be plenty of hatred. You can complain about road signs, but still they stand there and they show you the direction. And I think this was his approach. But he was not showing it, but certainly if there is so much hate, one feels it. One might not really show it, but unfortunately this has an impact on one's life. So certainly he felt it. Well, I think an excellent quotation from what he said, and this reference to a road sign. I would add cooperation and solidarity to this list. The very essence of Europe, I think, shows this need for cooperation, but not only cooperation between nations, but also, if I may, and I'm younger generation, but I did meet Bishop Pieronek. He was not a person who wanted to listen only, or try to understand the young, but he wanted to, I think, involve everyone so that Europe can enter a new era with the experience of the older generation, but with new energy also of the young. It's not that the people at the top should be doing something for the young. He wanted young people also to participate in the changes, in the spirit of solidarity together. I remember this story, discussing young priests speaking to Bishop Pieronek, everyone complaining, and they are just waiting. What is Bishop going to say? Some ideas, perhaps. And Bishop said, just do something, man, just do something. Don't talk only. For me, Bishop Pieronek is very much about looking for and speaking about the truth. The truth was always something very special for him, very precious, the truth. Yes, exactly. This was his motto, Bishop's motto, and also the sentence, in veritate, of the Bishop Pieronek Prize. Yes, so we've got a long list. The truth has been added. What else? Bishop Pieronek has a unique love towards peace and freedom, peace in the military sense. This was what I think also made him act in this European spirit. Often he spoke about his experiences related to the war, and he often said that being part of the European Union gives us a guarantee of peace and freedom. This was a very strong driving force for him. Again, freedom, peace from his perspective were extremely important, but not just having peace and quiet and do nothing, certainly not in this sense. Thank you, excellent. We've got more points on our list. Priest Rector, one word that I often associate is this sensitivity. For the younger generation, for the students, he seemed to be strict, perhaps, but this was just a reaction, I think, masking his very sensitive heart. I had a chance to witness actually several times when Bishop Pieronek was crying. This was done in situations in which he would remember our journey where we traveled together to Koto and the martyrs, their beatification. In Lima also I saw him. there were very poor people. He would be buying for $1 things from very poor people. He didn't need those things, but as those people were following him, they wanted to sell something to him in Lima. He would keep on buying different things to help those people. And I remember I saw him cry. We were in the Vatican radio. An interview was conducted in the context of a conference on refugees, and I remember he started crying at a certain moment. So again, the word sensitivity is what I keep thinking when I think about Bishop Pieronek. Microphone, please. Well, wisdom perhaps, but we should try to make it more precise. How do you understand that? Microphone, please.
Dobrze, proszę bardzo.
Next speaker. I only met Bishop Pieronek several times, but I think he was very open to others. I come from a different church, the Eastern Church. It was very important for me, actually. I was very interested, asking questions about my church, about what was happening in Ukraine. It was very nice, pleasant to speak to. Yes, so this interest, curiosity about the world and openness towards the world. Thank you. Sensitivity, but maybe the 10th value, perhaps. Ambassador Tombiński. Let me just add, from what I remember about Bishop Pieronek, I did not know him very well, but he liked life, simply. He was very open. He enjoyed good life, good cuisine, good company. So I'm just wondering how to put it, love of life, perhaps, in the positive sense. This is the way I would put it. Yes, it seems quite concrete. He was an excellent cook himself. Some of us actually had the chance to see how good he was in the kitchen. If someone offered him some good wine, for instance, or a glass of whiskey, he wouldn't say no, which again showed that he was just a human being. Comments without microphone, unfortunately. But again, in this sense, we can say we've got a list, a decalogue of values according to Pieronek: openness, curiosity about the world, dialogue, distance to yourself, solidarity, cooperation, truth, peace and freedom, sensitivity, wisdom, love of life. We've got a list here. I think if we wanted to add to those values a picture, perhaps, we would have then a jigsaw puzzle, perhaps, but one that might be put together, and once we put all those there in place, we would have the face of Bishop Pieronek, I think, in the front of us. Another one, deep faith. I think this is what should have been also mentioned. I remember it many times when I traveled. For instance, Bishop Pieronek in a car, he would take a rosary and pray. He wouldn't just talk to people in the car, but also pray. So I think this deep faith has to be there, because everything he did, I think, was based in his deep faith. Yes, believing bishop. That's the way I would put it.
Wierzący biskup to
yes, believing bishop.
Ale nie straciłem. Jaki żart? Przecież są tutaj wśród nas biskupi.
Why joking? Well, there are bishops here with us. At least there is one bishop present here. Please don't be joking. Some comments without microphone. Please remember microphone. Well, when speaking about those bishops believing, full of faith, I remember priest Volny, historian of the church, and I remember his words during our discussion. He said that there was a time when the Bishop of Paris used to be elected. There were a few candidates, and the Pope selected one. I don't really remember who it was, but the others, they were complaining. Why this one? And the Pope said, but the Bishop of Paris should at least have faith, be a true believer.
No proszę, przez tą też anegdotę myślę, że
Well, this anecdote also, I think,
wiele mówi o tym, że kim był
shows us a lot also about who Bishop Pieronek was for us.
Podkreślenie tej jego głębokiej wiary, bo tak ona go cechowała.
This deep faith, yes, was there
jak powinna każdego duchownego.
in private, certainly private faith, very deep, but at the same time, he saw in his faith treated as a certain anchor, perhaps, in the different discussions he had. Also outside the church, he was very authentic, I think, as a result. Everyone who knew him knew very well that what he was saying were not only words, not only declarations. One of the last, I think, visits on television, Monika Olejnik asked him about the re-Christianization of Europe, because someone said that re-Christianization of Europe is needed. And then Bishop Pieronek said, re-Christianing has to be started with oneself, always. This is, I remember what he said. So I think this also shows those deep experiences of his. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, especially for the last sequence, I think, the last part of our discussion when we thought about the heritage of Bishop Pieronek and some signposts, perhaps, that could be used. Luckily, they are very clear, I think, and not covered with mud, but those signposts, I think, clearly show us the way. I think we can also go deeper, reflect on the words, publications of Bishop Pieronek, and I hope we are going to have new publications, among others, thanks to the foundation of Bishop Pieronek. And as our Pieronkalia, or our Pieronek evening, is linked to the name day. Today is the name day of Tadeusz. A few days ago, he would have actually been able to celebrate his birthday, and also the anniversary of him becoming priest and also later bishop. Well, you know so much, fans from Krakow. So, ladies and gentlemen, name day, a small party, a small reception is needed. Professor, Madam Prime Minister, thank you very much. It's time for a bite to eat. Thank you. And still some information from the organizers.
Ta część mniej oficjalna znajduje się na dole, czy na poziomie zero?
Where I think downstairs, when we go downstairs, less official part will be held. 12 o'clock tomorrow. We are meeting also here tomorrow, Krzysztofory building here. The prize will be also presented here, and then we will accept the invitation of Mr. Majchrowski to All Saints Square. Walking distance from where we are, and the Holy Mass will be celebrated tomorrow at 6 p.m. St. Paul and Peter's Church, the church where Bishop Pieronek was buried. Again, not very far from here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please leave your headphones on your chair.